This final session is titled The Skill of Giving Ace Feedback. I recently needed to give some feedback to one of the members of our team in Stratford, and the more I thought about the prospect of this conversation, the more I became aware of certain emotions stirring up within me, emotions that didn't fill me with confidence. And, it soon became one of those conversations that I need to have rather than I want to have. You know those kind of conversations that I'm referring to. And then I stopped myself and I asked some questions. I said, why do I want to give this person the feedback? And the conclusion I came to is I want them to improve, and I also want the ministry that they serve in to get better. And then I asked myself this question, how do I respond to feedback? And I thought, I genuinely appreciate honest feedback. Just this week, I got some honest feedback about my preaching. 2 specific things that I can work on with my preaching. Now, I spend hours and hours and hours, week after week, and hopefully less time actually preaching. I spend hours preparing to preach. And one of my big fears is that I'll make the same mistakes every Sunday and never learn from those. 20 years down the line, I'll still be standing up, preaching, and making the same mistakes. In his book, Black Box Thinking, Matthew Syed points out that many of us, both individually, in organizations, and also often industry-wide, operate within something called a closed loop. Within a closed loop, failure doesn't lead to progress. And one of the ways that we can break out of closed loops is through this thing called feedback. So I finished the conversation with the person, and guess what? It actually went pretty well. I felt that we were both encouraged at the end of it. I was certainly encouraged. Might be wrong about the other person, but I certainly left that conversation feeling encouraged. The point of this session is to help us as leaders to get better at having these kinds of conversations so that effective feedback becomes ingrained in our culture. The previous session focused on how we can improve the way that we receive feedback, and Liz pointed out that feedback is imperative for us if we're going to grow as leaders and for us to change. But as leaders, we also need to effectively give feedback. If anyone's going to receive feedback, somebody's got to be giving it. And there's a good way to give feedback, and there's a bad way to give feedback. The aim of this final session is to become more efficient at giving feedback. So that might be in serving teams at work, at home, or wherever. And the primary point to make is this, that it's important that we distinguish between 3 different types of feedback. That idea was introduced in the session that we've just listened to, and it makes a big difference. I think it can really help us as we consider this whole issue of feedback. She pointed out, Sheila Heen, that there are 3 different types of feedback summarized by the acronym ACE. And that's the goal. We want to ace our feedback. A stands for appreciation. Appreciation motivates the receiver by communicating, I see you, you matter. C is coaching. It includes giving advice, suggestions, or corrections, and it helps the receiver to get better. E is for evaluation. It rates people against a set of criteria, and it tells the receiver where they stand. Why is it so important that we differentiate between these 3 different types of feedback? Well, for one, she pointed out that evaluation is the one that's the most emotionally loud, and it clouds out any sort of constructive criticism that might be brought our way. I see this playing out at home. As much as I say I love feedback, my wife is mercifully honest with me, and I'm very grateful for that. And often my initial reaction is quite defensive when she would evaluate me or comment on the way that I've done something. I'm not necessarily open in that moment to coaching. I appreciate the honesty, I appreciate the feedback, but I need to go away and consider what's been said before I'm open to this is a way that you can do that better. So that's why it's important that we break it down. We've used this word feedback this afternoon, and it's important that we break it down into appreciation, coaching, and evaluation. I want us just to get practical and talk through those three things and consider how can we leverage ACE, appreciation, coaching, and evaluation in our feedback. A for appreciation. Appreciation is all about relationship and human connection. It says, I see you, I get you, you matter. And it's especially important in our context of ministry where it's all about people, isn't it? It's really all about people. It's about people. People do matter. And everyone, including you and me, needs to be appreciated, don't we? We need to feel appreciated. I mean, think about children for a second. Those of you who've got younger ones, how many of you hear them say, like, Mom, Dad, look at this? I went to our school assembly this week, and Simone, our middle child, was on the play, and during a school assembly, and I just watched, and I could see when her moment was coming, because she kept just looking over to us, waiting. And when it was her time to speak, like, she jumped up, and although there was a whole audience of people, she was focusing in on us. Like, she was doing those lines for us. And as adults, we might be less direct in our expression of, look at me, or at least some of us are. But we're no less in need of appreciation and acknowledgement. And there is a tension, if we're honest. On the one hand, we know that our ultimate appreciation comes from God. Colossians 3, verse 24 says, it's the Lord God you are serving. And just before that it says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, working to the Lord and not to a human master. Because you know that ultimately the Lord has got an inheritance for you as your reward. And I've noticed that sometimes, not always, but sometimes leadership can be a thankless task. Sometimes I don't hear the verbal appreciation for what I do as a leader. Sometimes I don't see that appreciation. And I think it's that sometimes those who themselves have never been leaders genuinely don't know the weight that goes behind being a leader. And so often leadership is a thankless task. And as leaders, we serving the Lord need to remember that ultimately we need to look up. We need to serve to an audience of one. That I'm not always going to have somebody tapping me on the shoulder and saying, great job. But I look up and I see my Father. And I hear Jesus, my Master, saying to me, well done. Well done. So as leaders, we need to remember. So that's one tension. But I think on the other hand, we also need to recognize that those we lead, we need to treat them with dignity and respect, and we need to uplift them, and we need to encourage them. And we can't just say, well, your appreciation comes from the Lord. There needs to be, as well, a verbal acknowledgement and an appreciation of people. And I think it's important that we recognize that tension. So with this in mind, how can we show appreciation? Here are a few practical things that I think can help us. Number one, appreciation should be frequent. As a bare minimum, I focus every week as people are leaving where they've served on ministry teams to say thank you. I might not have talked to them at all on that Sunday, but as they're leaving the door, I would shout goodbye and I will say thank you for serving today. Everybody that I know has served on a given Sunday, I'll be frequent in my thanks. Partly because I know that we just get bombarded all the time with messages internally and externally that we're just not good enough. And just, there's no let up on that. And so I want to make sure that my appreciation is consistent, it's frequent, and it's as regular as it can possibly be. I also want to make sure that it's sincere. I mean, it's good to get a pat on the back and hear, well done. Thank you. But what I want to specifically say well done to is the way that you're diligently writing notes about these pearls of wisdom that I'm giving you here this afternoon. Can you see how that is just so much more specific and uplifting than just a gentle brushstroke, sincere, general appreciation? Berna unknowingly helps me a lot with this. When I compliment her on an outfit, and you guys all know, or those who do know my wife, she's got some style, and I might say, babe, you look good in that. But then she'll ask me the question, well, what specifically? And I'll say, babes, where do you want me to begin? I'd rather say to somebody after a Sunday, great worship, I'd rather say something like, I really like the way you were sensitive to the Holy Spirit's leading today in the way that you led. I'd rather say to the hosting team than great job, something like, when you smiled and welcomed everybody at the door today, that made a big difference. I felt it, and I can appreciate how anybody else who walked through that door would have enjoyed that smile. Number 3, surprising or unexpected. I had a friend who used to give me, and this was more in the context of marriage advice, he would say, an unexpected gift at an unexpected time. See 1 or 2 people nodding, and they know who I'm talking about. But I think that applies to in terms of expressing appreciation. An unexpected word or act of appreciation at an unexpected time goes far. When somebody knows they put in a big shift, they're waiting for that email or that call. But when they're not, when it's just about something that they've consistently done over a period of time and just out the blue, they get an expression of appreciation. That goes a long way. Number 4, personal, making it personal. What is this person really like? Will you go to the trouble to find out what they like? This week, I was thinking of somebody that I work with who has just been a phenomenal blessing for a long period of time, but particularly 2 things this week that I just got home and I said, Burns, she's such a blessing to us. And I said, well, how can we express appreciation for that? What is she like? And I had to ask Burns, I might have gone out and spent money on one expression of appreciation, but Burns could say she likes this, and it was very specific. And I can act on that because it's something that she likes. I think appreciation can also be fun. If you know what the person enjoys, when we took our team, I don't think I knew this in advance, but I took our staff team out for a day. We had a lovely meal, and then we went and played crazy golf together. And for some of them, it really was crazy. And it was just some fun appreciation that we did together. So I just want you to take a minute and reflect, how am I doing as a leader at expressing regular appreciation? Just literally 1 minute. Just write down some thoughts on your notes there. How am I doing when it comes to expressing regular appreciation? Okay, that's the A of ACE, feedback. The C stands for coaching. Coaching allows you to learn and improve and helps you to play at a higher level. Tomorrow morning, Andy Murray is going to be playing in his 5th Australian Open final. I don't know how many coaches he's been through over those 5 appearances, but there's certainly been a few. He came out at the start of this year saying this time he's going to be sticking with his current coach, Emily Maresmo. Now, Andy Murray's playing at a level that's as high as he's ever played before. He's got a real shot at winning the final tomorrow. For those of you who don't identify with Murray, who are Roger Federer fans, Federer just parted ways with his coach, Stefan Edberg. Federer is regarded as one of the masters of tennis in the history of the game. And he was on a bit of a slide downwards until Stefan Edberg came and worked with him for 2 years with phenomenal results in Federer's game. A coach can make a huge difference. And the most effective way that coaching is done is real-time. Real-time coaching, where we respond to things that we observe and we react and give input. We give coaching. We catch somebody doing something right, and we reinforce it. You know, as a parent, it seems like the objective is to constantly bring our children in line. We're watching, we're observing. There never seems to be a shortage of things to bring a corrective word on. But when they get something right, are we there affirming them? My son Joel, man, I tell you what, I feel like I have the same conversation with that boy every single morning. I've got more grace because I know that he's 3 years old and I have to remind myself. But there's only so many times I should have to tell you to get out of bed and get dressed for school. It's not the most complex of instructions that's ever been given, is it? And yet I have this one over and over again. And man, this week, one day I came into the room and there he was standing dressed and ready to go to school. I was like, my boy, well done. Real-time coaching. You see somebody doing something right and you affirm them then and there. On 2 occasions this week, I saw different people doing something different with real application and diligence. And in both instances, I just sent them a text message there and then, being specific about what I'd recognized and just affirmed what they had done. Sometimes we need to catch somebody, or we do catch somebody who's doing something nearly right, but not entirely right. They're a few degrees off. And that's the time when we come alongside them and we say, that was close. Next time, how about doing it this way? And then sometimes we're going to observe somebody who's doing something entirely wrong altogether. We might want to call a time out in those situations and have a conversation. Something like, that's not really how we want to do things around here. And what I find is very helpful is to take that moment and to create a bit of a picture of why we do things a certain way. What are we aiming toward? Help them to see that so that they can make that adjustment and say, well, next time we're in this situation, how about we do it this way instead of that way? I walked into the kitchen one Sunday and I heard the hosting team leader on the day observing the way somebody was presenting the eats for the day. And it had kind of just been like the box had just been bust open and poured out on the plate. That's the eats for the day. And I just heard this team leader say, who presented them like that? And there was a correction that was made. And there was an opportunity there as well to have a conversation about why it makes any difference whatsoever. If ultimately the biscuits are going to go down, what does it matter how we present them? But of course it does matter. And there was an opportunity for some real-time coaching. We had a conversation around receiving feedback, about how we adjust our feedback depending on the person involved. And likewise with giving feedback, there are different kinds of coaching for different people. Bill Hybels talks about gloves-off coaching. That's coaching that you do with those that you know very well. There's a high level of trust. There's a mutual understanding. You don't need to sugarcoat what you say. You can go in and be direct, and there's an understanding there. But that doesn't necessarily work in all situations. And particularly where there isn't a daily interaction, where you're not working so closely with people, maybe you can't speak as authoritatively there, an interrogative style is better. Asking some questions first is really helpful. I gave 2 outstanding pieces of feedback this week to 2 different people. Really useful. Could have hiked them up to the next level. But unfortunately, in both cases, I got the short end of the stick. And so the input wasn't pertinent to them in that situation because I'd misread it. I'd jumped to conclusions. And I could have really helped them by just asking a bunch of questions first. Just get an understanding of whether they were even the person involved. Were they even feeling that way? Instead of just assuming. Just asking some questions and getting a better handle would have enabled me to tailor that bit of input to them a little bit better. And then this is crucial. I think the goal in coaching is that the person knows that I believe in them. Bill Hybels says this. He says, I want people to levitate away from the conversation. I want them to be floating away when I've had the conversation. Why? Because they know I believe in them. That's the point of coaching, not to get a point across or, to show them where they've gone wrong, but it's that they walk away with a sense of belief. And, in this instance, I've just got to hold my hand up very high and say, I've failed badly in this so many times with my best intentions to give feedback to people and also my bent towards seeing something done a certain way. I've neglected to just really express a confidence and a belief in the person. And so even ultimately, if there was a change in the way something was done, it was at the expense of an opportunity to reinforce a belief in somebody and for them to know that I believe in them. Thankfully, I've learned from those mistakes and those failures. Hopefully in that area, I've broken out of that closed loop and I've made an adjustment. At least I have to my perspective so that I can give different coaching next time. Take a minute and answer these questions just on your notes. Jot down some thoughts. Do I do any coaching in your leadership role right now? Does coaching show up at all? Is it real time? And does my coaching lift people up? Does it convey that I really believe in them? Just take a minute and just write down your initial thoughts. Okay. A for appreciation, C for coaching, and E for evaluation. What does an evaluation do? An evaluation tells you where you stand. It's clear. There's a benchmark, and you know exactly where you stand in relation to that benchmark. You know what to expect, and you also know what's expected of you. It's been pointed out this is the most emotionally loud. And we should be careful not to mix coaching and evaluation at the risk of drowning out the coaching. I think just a couple of things that are important here are, number one, that we were clear on the shared expectations. In their book called 7 Practices of Effective Ministry, Andy Stanley, Reggie Joyner, and Lane Jones talk about this principle of defining the win. Defining the win. What does a win look like for us? And this was very helpful for us in our context in Stratford. A year ago, we asked this question: what does a win look like for us on a Sunday? What are the tangible things that we can measure on a Sunday? And how does everybody's contribution toward that weigh up? How do we measure? What do we measure? If there's no clarity on what those shared expectations are, it's very hard, isn't it, to give meaningful evaluation or feedback. If I haven't been very clear on, and if we haven't shared those expectations together, our feedback just becomes arbitrary, just becomes subjective. We need to be clear on what our objectives are, and that's something I would encourage and recommend every one of you in your respective teams to do, is to define what is that win. Can I put it in measurable terms so that I can then give meaningful feedback? And then secondly, being clear with those you lead how they are doing. Being specific, not beating around the bush, Most people aren't specific in conversations because they fear hurting others. And that's a legitimate fear. We should be concerned about hurting others. We should recognize that the human spirit is more fragile than we think it is. We should be mindful of how people are going to receive what we're going to say. And these two things can help us in that. Wolfie mentioned earlier the skill of showing up well that we talked about last year, where the health of any relationship, team, or organization is measured by the average time lag between identifying and discussing problems. And I think the same is for feedback. I've noticed that we have a tendency to talk or to share our feedback with others rather than talking to the person. I find myself doing that frequently, mostly to Burns, to get some objectivity, and I'll sometimes try and justify or explain it. But it's imperative that we take our observations and that we share them with the person involved, that we create an environment of safety. Number one, safety first. We come alongside and we establish and reinforce the relationship. We say, I want us to walk together. We say, I value you. I appreciate you. I want you on my side. We create a context of safety. And then we focus on facts, not feelings. We stick to the facts. When we can walk away and we can tell a story to ourselves that questions someone's motives and imposes our own interpretations on the event, rather than sticking to the facts, being specific about our observations. Just take a minute and write down, when people walk away from serving on my team, the thing that I'm leading, do they know precisely how effective a job that they are doing? Okay, let's conclude. Feedback includes appreciation, coaching, and evaluation. If we get this right, we're going to ace it. We're going to ace our feedback. Every one of these is important, and everyone satisfies a different human need. We need appreciation because we need to know that all the sweat and tears that we put into our jobs and our relationships are going to feel worthwhile. We need coaching to accelerate our learning, to focus our time and energy where it really matters, and to keep our relationships healthy and functioning. And we need evaluation to know where we stand. We We need evaluation to know what expectations are, and also to feel reassured and secure. Someone once said, feedback is the fuel of champions. And if we're going to grow, if we're going to excel, we need to receive feedback and we need to give good, strong, effective, healthy feedback. We've just got about 3 minutes left on this session, and you'll see some application questions in your notes there. Let's use these final 3 minutes to reflect on question 1 of the 3 kinds of feedback we need to give as leaders. Which do you most need to grow in doing better in the season? Which kind is most helpful for the growth of your team? And finally, what's one way you can contribute to that growth?